Is media business. Joining our panel in New York is David Folkenflik, the media correspondent for NPR and the author of the new book, Murdoch's World, The Last of the Old Media Empires. And David, let's start with the subject of your book. This was the year Murdoch broke his company, News Corporation, into two pieces. Why do you do that, and what does that say about the media industry?
Well, he'd been under pressure for a long time for both particularly his investors, but often his top executives as well. You know, the newspapers that had formed the foundation of his media empire and his riches for many decades turned out in the most recent years to be kind of a heavy weight around his neck. By splitting the company in two, he both insulated the more profitable television and entertainment properties from the fallout from that enormous hacking and corruption scandal in the UK, and he also liberated the share price, the stock value of those entertainment properties. And you've seen him be rewarded on the market for doing something he resisted doing for many, many years. The fallout from that is that these newspapers, which had once been profitable and are now struggling so mightily like so many of their competitors, are now no longer insulated by the great profits of, Fox News or of movies like Avatar that Fox Studios puts out. And so they're really vulnerable. He's now the chairman. He's got the CEO, Robert Thompson, who used to lead just the Wall Street Journal for him, trying to figure out what they're going to do to solve this riddle that has so far stymied so many of their peers. And News Corporation isn't the only company that seems to be moving away from print. Here's the headline from the Wrap this week about Tribune, because they, of course, were acquiring more stations. The headline says, Tribune closes local TV acquisition to become the largest independent broadcast group in the U.S. Tribune was once known as a newspaper company, but it doesn't want to be anymore. Well, Wall Street sort of punished it for being a newspaper company. I say this with some pain as a former Tribune company employee. I used to be a reporter at the Baltimore Sun. And what you've seen is sort of a multiple series of body blows to the newspaper division of that company, a combination of poor choices, poor management, a little greed on the part of some of the owners, and also the loading of it with enormous debt when it was taken over by one of its prior owners. At this point, they look very carefully at this. It's being led by a former top television and entertainment executive. And they said, the future is in TV and digital. Let's get away from these print things. And they've spun that off to the side. The one thing you can say for Rupert Murdoch was that he gave it a couple $2 billion, his new newspaper spinoff, which is the New News Corp, as a cushion. Tribune has basically said, look, we've cut these papers to where they're basically profitable. We're not going to give them any cushion at all. We're going to try to sell them, and they can fend for themselves. Let me bring up with our panel as well the second headline, Future for Print with a question mark. It's happening here at the parent company of CNN as well. Time Warner is spinning off its magazine division, Time Inc., next year. What do you all make of these continued moves away from print and toward digital, Christina?
I think that it is inevitable because, print has suffered for a long time, and these companies are realizing that they have to move to other avenues of making money. The challenge is that the ad revenue hasn't caught up on the web to the place where it was with print. But it becomes inevitable because the profits just aren't there. Well,
here's one contradictory indicator this month. Newsweek, which went out of print a year ago, came back and said it's going to bring the print edition back from the dead. This was a big surprise to people. But the new owners said, we're only going to do this at a profit. We're only going to do this at the subscriber levels that make it work. We're not going to depend on advertising alone. I suppose that's true for every media company now, right?
Yeah, we've actually seen Politico, which is owned by Allbrighton, which was a local TV company.
But which sold its stations.
Right. They doubled down on sort of a magazine and on hyper-local media with Capital, and they're hoping to do that via a paywall.
Let's talk about one of the new media barons, Jeff Bezos, of course, who bought the Washington Post in a very big surprise a few months ago. Here's what he said recently to CNN about his plans for the Post.
For me, I thought the Washington Post is an important institution, and I am optimistic about its future. It's a personal investment, and I'm hopeful that I can help from a distance, in part by providing runway for them to do a series of experiments, and in part through bringing some of the philosophy that we have used at Amazon to the Post.
David, you covered the story when it happened.
Sure.
Have we seen any evidence that the Post has changed at all under the new owner?
Not really. I mean, you've seen the continuation of its aggressive watchdog journalism. Fairly newly installed editor Marty Baron, whose appointment preceded Jeff Bezos, is going to stay on that post. He may well be the best newspaper editor in the country right now. I think you're watching Bezos study this very closely. He's a very smart guy. He really understands the relationship between the consumer, particularly the digital consumer, and the the company that he founded and has such a force with Amazon, they're hoping that he brings that sensibility to the paper. Catherine Weymouth, who's was the daughter of the chairman of the Washington Post company, Don Graham. Weymouth said in a recent interview she stayed on for now as publisher that the biggest change is that men no longer wear ties. You just noticed Jeff Bezos in that clip with an open collar, like yourself. So at the moment, things are stylistic. I think he's making a very careful study, and I think you're going to see some real changes in the future, but we don't know what those will be yet.
I thought one of the most interesting things the Washington Post did this year, and I wonder what you all thought as well, was the creation of a website called No More. It feels a little bit like BuzzFeed, a little bit like Upworthy, like Viral Nova. It's one of these viral websites, or at least it's trying to be. I wonder if this was the year that the virality industry really took hold, and everyone wanted to have buzzy headlines like your employer, BuzzFeed.
Well, I think it's been taking hold for some time. I mean, we launched the news organization part of BuzzFeed 2 years ago now.
2 years, yeah.
And I think that if you just look at the media today, there are lots of people trying to tap into what we've been able to do so successfully.
What are the secrets to a BuzzFeed headline, by the way, or an Upworthy headline?
Well, the idea behind BuzzFeed is that we're not aimed towards people who are like typing in search terms into Google. Like, the idea behind BuzzFeed content is that it's shareable everywhere and people want to share it.
Do we think we're going to see just more and more of that in 2014, Hunter?
Well, we've already
Is this just a fad or something more?
We've already seen, I mean, obviously you mentioned some of the better-known sites, but we've seen a lot of copycats. But one thing that I find interesting is that Facebook has hinted that they might change their algorithm. And when you have these sites that have really, as Rosie said, tapped into search and social...
They're really depending on traffic from Facebook.
Exactly, and we saw LinkedIn earlier this year sort of create an in-house editorial team and send less traffic outward. And I think if Facebook and Twitter do something similar, we could see another shift.
We've got a couple more topics to get to, so let's take one break and come back to them. Everybody stay with me, because coming up, it's the single greatest disruptive force in the media this year. It's the thing causing the most pain and creating the most potential. I don't want to give it away. Let's discuss it next.